Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Learn How Companies like Phone2Action are using NPM in their front-end development. My name is Danielle Wombolt, and I'll be your moderator. I work on the marketing team here at NPM, and I'm excited to be hosting today's session. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Daniel Sauble, Head of Product here at NPM, and Daniel Thompson, front-end developer at Phone2Action. Before I hand it over to Daniel, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about the presentation in the BrightTalk webinar platform. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible through the same link you're using now. We've also added some attachments, which are available through the attachment tabs at the bottom of your screen. This is where you'll find today's slides and other related content such as our blog. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have a question for the Daniels, please feel free to send it through the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your player. We'll be answering all questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to submit your questions at any time. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we will sure to follow up with you afterwards. Now over to Daniel.
Thanks, Danielle. So before we pass it off to Phone2Action, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about our recent announcement of NPM Pro. So what is NPM Pro? So I thought the best way to kind of talk about this was to describe the sort of person that it's meant for. So we built NPM Pro for professional developers. And so if you're a developer, you probably write code as part of your day job. But in addition to your day job, you probably also contribute to open source projects in your spare time. And developers often also have side projects that they contribute to. And so there's kind of these three classes of, these three categories of software that you contribute to as a developer. And so NPM Pro was really intended to provide a place that encapsulates these last two areas. And the thing is, there's a lot of developers that are kind of like you. And so we all kind of intuitively know how open source works. You have a large body of maintainers who are focused on making the ecosystem as good as it possibly can be. But you also have these personal projects that kind of sit on the periphery, and they're kind of isolated. And so what we wanted to do with NPM Pro was to provide a way that you could contribute to other people's personal projects and vice versa. And so with NPM Pro, we wanted to solve this problem. And basically, if you get to a point in your personal project, maybe it's a startup idea, or it's something that you aren't quite ready to let the broader community see yet, you can maybe pull in one other person or two other people and have them help you make it better and get it ready to go live to others and the public at large. And so a way you can think about NPM Pro is that it's essentially a box that belongs to you and encapsulates all of your personal projects. And so you can invite other NPM Pro users inside your box to maintain specific packages that you want to collaborate around. And they can do the same for you. But to make sure that NPM Pro is consistent with the way that most people use NPM today, we also wanted to make sure that the box also encapsulates all of those open source projects for whom you are also a maintainer. And just like with your personal projects, you can invite other collaborators to maintain those open source projects, and they can do the same for you. So with NPM Pro, you get an unlimited number of these private personal packages, as well as those public packages. But in addition, you also get basic support for when you run into issues using NPM. And you also have access to all those great NPM security features that you use today, including things like NPM Audit, which helps to automate that research and remediation process when you run into packages that have vulnerabilities. And then finally, with NPM Pro, you get that dedicated namespace. So you don't have to fight to get the specific name that you want your packages to have. You could just have any name that you want underneath that dedicated namespace. But how does NPM Pro compare to NPM Teams? So we recently renamed NPM orgs to NPM Teams. So now we have these two products side by side, NPM Pro and NPM Teams. And understanding the difference between them, I think is really important, because while they look very similar from the outside, they're actually intended for very, very different use cases. So you remember earlier I mentioned that a typical developer has kind of these three areas where they write and contribute code. You have your day job, you have those open source projects that you write on the side, and then you also have those personal projects that you write on the side. And NPM Teams is really intended for that first category, your day job. And so how you can think about Teams is that it's essentially a box that sits around your entire company's organization. So all of the developers in your company and all of their packages, both public and private, sit within this box. And because your organization probably has more than just one development team, NPM Teams makes it possible to accurately map to what your organizational structure actually is. So if you have two teams, each with, say, 5 developers, the 5 developers in the first team can have access to the packages that they need to do their job, and the developers in the second team can have access to the packages that they need in their job. And NPM Team provides a really convenient wrapper around this construct. So those are what the products are, but what's next? Where are we going at NPM? So I wanted to spend just a few minutes to provide some context around that and to make it better. So NPM is really, really popular. There are over 11 million developers who download more than 42 billion packages per month. And the registry itself contains more than 1 million different packages. And the growth of JavaScript and NPM are more or less the same these days. If you write an application in JavaScript, chances are about 97% of its code is going to come from NPM. And so the vast majority of the world's JavaScript, especially the open source reusable code, is going to come from NPM. And JavaScript as a language is continuing to grow very rapidly. The ecosystem as a whole is growing more rapidly than the next several most popular ecosystems combined. And we don't really see this growth slowing anytime soon. So with this great popularity comes a great responsibility to make sure that the NPM ecosystem is as good as it possibly can be. And so these are 4 areas that we're actively looking to make better. And I want to talk about each one of them briefly. And so the 4 areas are discovery, collaboration, security, and the developer experience. So discovery becomes a really difficult problem when you have so many packages. In the case of NPM, you literally have 1 million packages to choose from. So how do you find the one that's the best for your application? And so today, if you go to npmjs.com, you can search for packages. You can even look at categories of packages to help winnow down those 1 million packages into a subset that's more manageable. But we want to make this search experience even better. So this is an area that we're actively looking to improve. But another problem is collaboration. And so when you have an ecosystem that consists of 11 million developers who are collectively responsible for maintaining all 1 million of those packages, how do you make sure that they can do that effectively? I think as we all know from recent security issues, sometimes packages can fall through the cracks, even packages that are heavily relied upon by an entire ecosystem. So making sure that we surface packages that are in need of help and assistance is a really important ingredient to making sure that the ecosystem can remain healthy as it grows. And one thing that we've done recently to make this better is announcing the new NPM fund account command within the CLI, which lets you essentially put within your package.json a field where you can link to a funding platform that you use to support the development of your particular package. And NPM Fund makes this field visible to others who are installing and using your packages. But we also have other things that we're also looking to do to make this particular area of improvement even better. And this feeds really closely into this issue of security. So NPM is well known for having a high degree of modularity. And so if you have a dozen top-level dependencies specified in your application, chances are when you run npm install, you're actually going to download hundreds or maybe thousands of intermediate or transitive dependencies. And the problem is, if any one of these thousands of dependencies has a security issue, the effects of that can trickle down into your application. So it's really important to know when any of these many hidden dependencies have problems that you need to know about. And so we already have tools to address this today. We have NPM Audit, which helps you discover which of those transitive dependencies have issues, and then it can automate upgrading those dependencies to versions that don't have problems. But we think this can be even better, because part of the problem is that while you can just assume that things are black and white and some things are good and other things are bad, reality is a little bit more gray. And so depending upon the context in which you use a package, that can determine whether or not it's a risk that you're willing to accept in your organization or not. And so what we're trying to do at NPM is actually raise more of these signals up so that you're able to get the information that you need to make an informed decision about what packages you should or should not use, rather than relying on a pure binary black and white policy. And the final area of improvement is this concept of the developer experience. So when you have a registry that's growing at 40% per year, it becomes a really large effort to make sure that the registry performs as well as it possibly can. Our goal for the registry is for it to be invisible. We want it to always be there when you need it, and we want it to be really, really fast, so that when you're running npm install, you don't even realize that there's this registry upstream that's serving all of these hundreds and thousands of packages. But the other component of the developer experience is the interface that you use to interact with it. And for most of you, that's going to be the NPM CLI. So we have a whole team that's dedicated to continuing to make that CLI as good as it possibly can be. And I might be a little bit biased, but I feel like the NPM ecosystem has one of the best developer experiences of any ecosystem. And we really intend to keep it that way. And so watch this space, because we have lots of really cool stuff coming. But for now, let's go turn things over to Daniel to talk a little bit about how Phone2Action uses NPM.
Thanks, Daniel. So I am Daniel Thompson. I am a front-end developer at Phone2Action. So what is Phone2Action? It is a comprehensive digital engagement and communications platform for grassroots advocacy, public affairs, and government relations. So what this means is that, among other things, we work with our various different clients, such as the National Parks Conservation Association and the American Library Association, to build campaigns that connect the public with various people in power, such as their legislators or the CEO of Macmillan Publisher, about various different issues that are important both to the clients and the public. So in the case of the NPCA, this is a campaign for clean air and healthy climate. And for the ALA, this is a campaign or a petition rather, to get Macmillan Publisher to allow libraries to purchase more copies of ebooks. So in addition to these interfaces that our advocates, the general public, sees, we also, of course, have a back-end admin dashboard. This dashboard, or this feature showed here, is our email marketing tool, which can be used by our clients to send out emails to all sorts of people that have signed up through their various different campaigns. So for instance, if they have a new campaign coming up or a new issue, they can announce that out to the people who previously participated in order to increase engagement. This email tool is one of our newest features. And it's one of kind of a number of features that we've implemented over the past couple of years. And we've started to notice a couple of issues in our front-end development with the addition of, kind of the tacking on of each of these new features. So what are those issues? These are pretty common front-end development issues, I would say, in any sort of growing project. We have seen some code duplication across different features of the site with similar UI elements, so maybe tooltips or modals or something like that showing up duplicated in different parts of the site. In those cases, we've also seen some small inconsistencies in the design, so how those things look and or the implementation of those elements. So the code might look a little bit different in one place or the other. And all of that comes together to make it really hard to confidently update the elements that we already have. So if we decide, we want to change the background color of all the tooltips on the website, we've got to go through and find every instance of this in the platform, figure out how to solve this problem in each of those specific cases. And that adds a bunch more work than it really should if we want these things to be consistent across the site. Luckily, these are somewhat frequently run into issues in the front-end development world, and there are some good solutions out there. What we've decided to do is build a design system. So in addition to addressing these issues that I was just talking about, our design system is also built to work along with a feature-by-feature redesign of our platform, of our admin dashboard. So this design system, we've called it Beacon. It serves both as a brand and style guide and a component library. So it gives us kind of a single source of truth for both the design, things like what colors are allowed to show up on the site, what sort of spacing we can have on things, what specifically do our modals look like, or our tooltips, et cetera, all of our different UI elements. And then also gives us the single source of truth for code. So it gives us kind of a limited API of CSS classes. We write all of that in SCSS, and then view components as well that have a limited and well-defined and well-documented API for application to be used all across the website. This design system is actually hosted, so this is where NPM comes into play. Our design system is hosted as a private package on NPM through, what was NPM orgs and what will now be NPM Teams, I believe. So you might be wondering, well, why did we decide to do this design system as a separate package and not just include these components in some sort of shared folder nested within our platform code? And there are a number of benefits to that. Some of these are just kind of the standard benefits that come with any sort of open source type library. So we get we have semantic versioning on this. We can bump up the version number as we make changes in the design system code, and then ensure that we've prepared for those changes on the platform side when we include it. It also lets us reuse this design system code across our project, so we can actually ensure consistency not just within the admin dashboard, but then across our various other projects and products as well. One of the big benefits that's come from this division here actually is a clear delineation of who owns what code. So we have a design system team particularly that is made of front-end developers and designers and some full-stack developers, all of whom are also working on our main platform, but who are really in charge of this design system code and API. So this removes some of the obligation from other platform developers to do, some of the more intricate UI work. If we have some, new version of a modal or new tweak to a UI element, we get the people who are in charge of the design system to worry about things like, okay, how are we going to test this across browsers? How are we going to worry about responsive design here? How are we going to make sure that this remains accessible? And because we're able to focus that only on the design system team, it frees up the rest of the platform developers to focus on the other parts of the work that they're working on. This also means that we can have a totally separate flow of review. So we have different Jira tickets. We've got GitHub issues and pull requests and such that are all going to a separate repository rather than all being concentrated in one place. So we just, again, are limiting who is working on what stuff so that they can focus on the things that they're really intending to work on. And then finally, as you saw, we have a documentation site for Beacon. The code for that documentation site is included in our package in NPM so that we're able to onboard new design system developers and team members as necessary. without having to worry about getting all the other dependencies of our core platform site in place. And I believe that's all that I had. So I'll turn it back to Daniel, and I think we'll take some questions.
Cool, thank you. So it looks like we do have a few questions coming in. First question. So how difficult was it for you to get used to working on the NPM platform?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It actually wasn't hard at all. So we were already using NPM. As you said, many, or, the vast majority of JavaScript code is already using NPM. And so we really, in order to get the package in place on the platform side, it was as easy as adding one little line to our package.json. And getting the package actually hosted by NPM, again, was a very kind of quick and easy flow there. So the hardest part of all of that was the actual, writing the code in a way that's flexible and usable in the way that we wanted it to be. But using NPM was a breeze.
Awesome. So with the benefit of hindsight, do you think that you made the right choice in breaking out that common code into a separate package? Would you have done things the same way if you had to do it again?
I would say absolutely. Honestly, I kind of want to break out some of the other stuff that we have in our platform into other packages too. We've got, I think especially for me, the biggest benefit there is that breaking up of the teams and really being able to totally focus on, on the things that we're working on and making sure that we're not putting the brunt of the UI work on somebody who's just trying to, implement something so that they can, build in a filter or something like that. We're able to really distinguish between these teams in a way that's a lot more efficient.
Awesome. So we have another question. So how much is provided by the design system? Is it only common components, or is it everything like layouts and pages?
Yeah, so our goal is for everything to end up being in the design system. We certainly have some rules within the design system about how pages should be laid out and how the sidebar and stuff should work. This is sort of an incremental process. So right now it's mostly just kind of the smaller UI components. We've got buttons and tooltips and modals and a couple other small things. And because we're doing this as a feature-by-feature redesign as well, we have pages on the site that are still using, that are not using the design system at all. So it is incremental, which has both been a little bit challenging and surprisingly smooth process to do anyways.
Neat, that's really interesting. Let's see, so we have a question around team permissions. So how do you coordinate updates, and who's in charge of maintaining and updating this particular shared package? How do you kind of do that?
Yeah, so we use kind of a combination of Git and GitHub permissions and NPM permissions. So anyone on our whole engineering team can submit a pull request to our design system repository on GitHub. And then we have a process through there where only members of the design system team can review and approve those pull requests. And then we have an even smaller group of people who are in charge of actually getting the code from GitHub into NPM and getting that package updated.
Cool. So do you want to get to a place eventually where CI is responsible for doing that publish, or keeping that final sign-off in the hands of developers? Is that what you would like to do?
Yeah, of course. We would like for that to be as automated as possible. Right now, I believe when we merge into master, even on GitHub, there's already an automatic hook that goes there, and I think that somebody just has to approve that in order to make it go all the way through. So there's a pretty limited amount of real work that we have to do once that it gets approved by the team.
Awesome. We have another question here about multiple private packages. So do you have multiple private packages? And if so, what are some of the things you have learned while breaking them out into multiple packages? And what tips do you have for those who are in the process of breaking out a code base into multiple packages?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. Right now, our design system is the only private package, so we have a couple other private packages that are one-off tools, but this is the only one that we use in this way, where we're really importing it into a bigger, the bigger product of the platform. I think it has been helpful for us to do this breakout into the design system as in line with a redesign, because it makes it more obvious, especially to the people who are looking at this design system every day, to see which parts of the site have already kind of implemented the design system and which parts haven't. I think that if we were, going back and pulling out content that was already written, because this redesign is also coming with shifting from Bootstrap and jQuery to more view-based components, there's a pretty vast difference in both the design and the implementation of these parts. And so it's been less pulling out stuff and more kind of rewriting and re-implementing stuff into the new design system.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's your take on mono repos versus micro repos? Do you have an opinion on that?
I'm not sure I do. I think I might need a little more context there.
Okay. I don't think I've heard of micro repos before. I'll have to look that up. Cool. So it seems like we also have a few questions for NPM. So I'll try and take those. So one question is, are there any new NPM product features coming up that you can talk about? So one thing that we're really excited about that we're getting close to releasing is this new Security Insights API that I mentioned earlier. And so basically what this will let you do is provide a GraphQL API that you can use to ask about specific packages and learn about the circumstances under which they were published, as well as any behavioral quirks that they might have. And so, for example, knowing that a package runs a post install script is a really interesting piece of information that can help clue you into behavior that you might not want in your own application. So that's one thing that we're really excited about. Another question here is around the rename. So why did we rename our products into these things called NPM Pro and NPM Teams? And the reason why we did this is because we wanted names that better matched how we expect people to use them, and to have names that make you think about those boxes that we defined earlier. And so we believe that these new names do a much better job of indicating that NPM Pro is the thing that you want if you're an individual developer with your own side projects, and that NPM Teams is the thing that you want if you are part of a more or less permanent group of developers who have a shared body of code and packages that you're responsible for maintaining and making better. And it also looks like we got a quick clarification on the monorepo question. So it looks like what they meant by micro repo is essentially the difference between having a single monorepo for all of your packages versus having kind of one repo for each package. So basically, do you have all your packages in one repo, or do you kind of split them up? And kind of what's your take on what the right approach is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as I've talked about, I think I enjoy the benefits of having these actually broken out completely, and really letting people that are working on different parts of the site not even have to think about or worry about the other things. I think that is I'm sure that is a good solution for us right now. I can't say that that's going to be good across the board for everyone. I definitely understand some of the benefits of doing a monorepo, but I think in this case where we have a dedicated team that's in charge of this, and that team is not totally completely off to the side, we're also continuing to work on the core platform. It actually makes a lot of sense to have it to kind of protect ourselves and to protect the boundaries of the design system from the rest of the platform. I think having the kind of multiple repositories here is really helpful.
Great. So I think that's all the questions that we had. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I think we had some really good insight into kind of how you use NPM. So I'm going to hand it over to Danielle to wrap it up. But thank you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel and Daniel. As mentioned earlier, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and is accessible through the same link you're using now. We've also added some related material, including today's slides, in the attachment tab at the bottom of your player. Thank you, happy holidays, and thank you for joining.